Shalom, everybody. Welcome back to our Shalom Talks. If you're reading along with us, you'll know we're in Mark 11 now. If you're interested at all in reading with us through the Gospels, contact the church in whatever form would agree with you. We'd be glad to have you reading along with us. This section that we read today is one that people will pull out of context and use to justify anger or to justify cruelty. I say that to preface what I'm about to read. And I hope that today we can find some wholeness and some completeness in what's happening here in the text and be able to walk it out in our own life. In Mark chapter 11 and verse 15, it says this: "They came to Jerusalem and they entered the temple. They began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And they turned over the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. They would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was telling them, is it not written that my house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers." There's a lot to unpack in this little section here, 15 through 18. The reality of what's happening here is that the majority of the expression that we see in Jesus is coming from the exploitation or the lack of consideration for the spiritual depravity of the poor. So those that are not financially inclined also are hungry for God. And the system that was in place was making it so that they weren't able to access or make sacrifice to God in the ways that everyone else was. So when we look at this text and we look at our own life, we can talk about the history, we can talk about the context, we can talk about the tables, and we can talk about all the different things that are happening in the text and the differences between this gospel and that gospel and the ways that it's recorded. But here's the most important thing. When we look at the text and we try to find wholeness in ourselves for what does this mean for me? What is God trying to say? It is placing ourselves in the text, in every position of the text. And so we have to come at this from being someone who is financially not able to feel like they belong in a place of worship. It also involves putting ourselves in the position of those that are financially inclined and maybe are religiously regular in attendance, maybe even have positions of power. We also have to put ourselves in the perspective of Jesus, seeing the injustice or seeing the brokenness. And again, people like to take this and they like to justify anger. But when we look at this text, what we see is all throughout the first couple of days of Jesus being in Jerusalem is sorrow. That he mourns for Jerusalem. He weeps for Jerusalem. Jerusalem breaks his heart because they're neglecting to see those that need God the most. And they're not trying to help them. And so when we look at this text, maybe you're in the position actually where you don't feel like you belong in church because this, or this. That's not true. That's not Jesus. I don't know who told you that, but that's not true. Maybe you're like the religious leaders or the money changers where you just don't even think about the fact that other people don't feel like they belong or don't feel like they can even go into a place of worship. It's our responsibility to then pivot and realize the ways that we've turned a blind eye to those that are the most in need. And maybe you need to be like Jesus, and maybe you can see an injustice. What I'm not going to suggest is that you go in anger. What Jesus is able to do is what's called a righteous anger. It comes from a place of pureness, and it comes from a place of perfection. We are human through and through. We don't have the ability to control our emotions the way that Jesus can. And so when we go to address injustice, we have to spend a lot of time reflecting and thinking about what we're going to say and how we're going to handle it, and holding composure the best that we can so that we can bring the shalom, the peace, the wholeness, the togetherness, the way that God intended it to be, the ways that we're called to. And so this passage, again, is taken out of context all the time, but for us, we need to reflect on the ways that we see spiritual injustice in and around our lives, the ways that we've turned a blind eye to spiritual injustice, but also the ways that we've lied to ourselves about where we belong and where we don't belong. We're going to talk on Sunday, actually, about the importance of the belonging, what we're called into, and the ways that the enemy tells us that we don't belong there. But as you pray and as you reflect today in your reading, I hope that this is an encouragement to you. I hope that this challenges you. And if there's any way that our church can continue to be a blessing in this, if you have any questions about it at all, please reach out to us. I'm going to pray that over you. I hope that the rest of your day is blessed. Father, thank you for the ways that you have a heart for those that feel like they don't belong, for those that are lost, for those that are deprived of essential needs. Father, help us to have the same heart. Help us to look for those that are in need around our life and give them what they need most, a loving relationship with an eternal Father who has paid it all and has made it finished and made it good. Thank you so much for Jesus. It's in his name that I pray.